I feel the pull, the world's last gasp of breath before truth descends. Once your mind stills, you hear it, the quiet confession in the hollow between heartbeats. You sense that beneath all striving lies a raw terrain of emptiness, of silent suffering unmasked, and here, without adornment or consolation, begins the unveiling. All life is anguish, coursing through fragile flesh, and your thought becomes the prism through which this suffering refracts. You chase illusions, wealth, status, performance, as if they hold meaning, but they unravel under scrutiny. The applause dies, the applause of an audience that never arrives. You find yourself limping through vacant corridors of desire, haunted by the echo of want that never fades. You taste exhaustion when the treadmill never ends, when each labor and ambition dissolves into more labor, more ambition. The promise of fulfillment withers before you grasp it. You feel the hollowness. Homes built on fleeting respectability, relationships tethered to masks, routines stitched to distraction. The modern world whispers of purpose, but beneath the whisper is a scream, the will forever unsatisfied. As the lantern of thought illuminates this terrain, you sense a trembling relief. To admit suffering is not defeat, but the beginning of lucidity. For clarity emerges in the fracture. The moment you stop pretending that the acceleration matters, the world's story is not yours. And to chase it is to become its shadow. Let your illusions shatter and breathe. Let us walk through the ruined plains of desire. You recall the philosopher who claimed the world is will, an endless striving that never rests. You feel that will gnaw inside, a constant hunger masked by ambition and horror alike. You notice how modernity dresses this hunger as virtue. Work harder, achieve more. Yet the frantic rhythm only deepens the ache. No amount of success stills the violence of the will, because the will is desire itself. You look at the screen of your life, bright, endless, and discern the pattern. You surrender your soul inch by inch. You trade presence for dopamine flickers, metrics for meaning, movement for being. The machine demands you grind. You acquiesce, thinking that to resist is weakness. You forget that the greatest strength lies in refusal, that to say no to the world's delirium is to reclaim your soul. In this moment of witnessing, your chest tightens and then loosens. There is release in seeing the illusion, the relief of denouncing the pact. You will no longer play the world's performance. The silence that follows is not lonely, it is spacious. The mind unclenches, and you glimpse that beneath the roar of will, stillness lies. You feel every fiber of exile, from nature, from deep communion, from the infinite silence that humbles the ego. You feel the body's fractures, exhaustion, malaise, the dull grief that lingers at dusk, and you confront the shattering truth. You are not your projects, you are not your roles. You are the silent witness to the will. You are the void in which suffering surfaces, but also where clarity dawns. There is beauty in this void. It is austere, but unwavering. It is the clarity of the midnight sky after all light has died. Stripped of illusions, you perceive the extraordinary ordinariness of existence, the ineluctable flow of time, petals falling, shadows lengthening, breath inhaled and released. A clarity that does not numb, but deepens perception. Every 2 or 3 minutes of this unfolding voice would whisper a new painful truth. That ambition is self-inflicted torment. That love, too, often masquerades as need. That community can dissolve into machinery of comparison. And after each whisper, a release, deeper stillness. For once the veils drop, you taste not relief in comfort, but relief in unvarnished seeing. You wander through cultural ruins, the myth of progress, the worship of youth, the cult of busyness. You see how these myths serve the will's illusions, binding you to its cycles. You feel the weight of deadlines, the narcotic buzz of social feeds, the irony of being ever connected yet isolated, and you perceive the quiet desperation. We remain lonely in crowds, incapable of facing the silence, because the silence is death to the ego. But inside the silence lies the seed of renunciation. To renounce is not to give up life, it is to cease fighting life. It is to cease nourishing the illusions. It is to retreat from the tyranny of expectation and illusion. In that retreat, you discover perspective, sovereignty, and the freedom not to act. Your heart cracks open, and inside the crack blooms a sober delight, the world without distortion, the cold clarity of truth. You perceive suffering not as punishment, but as the matrix of self-awareness. You perceive solitude not as absence, but as presence, presence of the real. The ego dissolves, desire shrinks, quiet prevails. Now time slows. You feel rooted in the now that is more than fleeting satisfaction. You gaze at the vast sky of detachment. You realize that meaning never hides in accomplishment. It resides in conscious surrender to what is. Not defeat, but cessation of the chase. There is no resolution, only the dissolution of expectation. The lantern's flame flickers, low but unwavering. The voice in your mind softens. You stand on the edge of dissolution, your illusions burning quietly away. The will recedes, and you abide in witness. This is your final release. The self unmade, the desires quieted, the echoes of ambition hushed. You are left with nothing and everything. Pure observance, clear and still. Here, the final flicker of voice dissolves. To suffer is to awaken in a world not of one's choosing. The child cries not from rebellion, but because pain is the native tongue of existence, and though language may veil it, the body knows. The soul carries it quietly, as the night carries the weight of unseen stars. Every pleasure is but the brief cessation of need, and even joy is tainted by the shadow of its end. The laughter of life echoes through a corridor lined with graves. What you call happiness is the illusion of the will momentarily pacified. Yet the will is never satisfied. It is a thirst that deepens as it drinks. The instant desire is fulfilled, another rises to take its place. This is not progress, but a carousel of torment, each rotation driven by the hope that the next moment will redeem the last. But time reveals its trickery. There is no final arrival, no summit that silences the hunger. You labor for comfort, then suffer the boredom that follows. You seek meaning only to discover it shaped by others' expectations, not your own truth. What you build is haunted by what cannot last. Even love, the most seductive of illusions, conceals its cost, the fear of loss, the chains of attachment, the quiet violence of need. To love under the tyranny of the will is to grasp what must perish, to bind yourself to future grief. The world parades its vanities, ambition, wealth, renown. But beneath the surface lies a frantic escape from silence. For silence reminds the soul of its solitude, and solitude reveals the lie of significance. The noise of modernity is not life, but anesthesia. It dulls the sting of existence without healing it. To detach from the frenzy is not madness, it is the only sanity left in a culture addicted to becoming. You sense now the weight of things not spoken, the sorrow beneath accomplishment, the disillusionment beneath smiles, the mourning that attends every gain. All that is won must be lost. All that is grasped must eventually be released. This is not tragedy, it is structure. And to resist it is to multiply suffering. Freedom does not lie in mastery of life, but in renunciation of its tyranny. When you cease to demand, you begin to see. When you cease to strive, you begin to be. In detachment there is not coldness, but a deeper warmth, one that does not burn, but holds. A stillness that witnesses without clinging. A gaze that no longer seeks to possess. The ego trembles before this stillness. It fears extinction, but what it fears is truth. The self is a mirage, sustained by repetition, identity constructed from roles, achievements, and projections. Strip these away, and you do not vanish, you emerge, not as something, but as silence, not as a story, but as presence. To detach is not to withdraw from life, but to meet it without illusion, to walk among the living as one who no longer begs from them the proof of his worth. This is not indifference, but liberation. Love without possession, work without obsession, solitude without despair. The world does not reward detachment, it misunderstands it. But the soul, once touched by this clarity, cannot return to the blindness of will. It may suffer, yes, but now the suffering is not wasted. It is transformed into awareness. And awareness, even in pain, is sacred. Let the illusions fall like autumn leaves. Let the noise recede like a distant storm. Beneath it all, there is only what is and the one who sees. There is no greater illusion than the belief that life is a gift. What is freely given is also freely taken. You enter this world without consent, thrust into a theater whose script you never chose, with players who stumble and scenes that bleed. The curtain rises not to celebration, but to a silent question: why must I endure? From the first breath, the will awakens blind, urgent, insatiable. The infant cries for warmth, the child yearns for recognition, the adult chases power disguised as stability. Yet none of these grant peace. At best, they postpone the emptiness, like music delaying silence. But the silence waits, and always returns, heavier each time. The body is not a temple, but a prison, a cage of nerves and tissues through which the will exacts its tax. Each pulse is a declaration of need. Each hunger, each ache, each fleeting pleasure masks the reality that to live is to be chained to the machinery of desire. The very act of surviving is an agreement with suffering, signed anew with each heartbeat. And still you pursue. You chase love as if it will complete you, as if another's presence might cancel your solitude. But love, under the governance of will, becomes longing, made flesh, an effort not to see the other, but to possess them, to make them a mirror for your own desperation. This is why it fails. This is why, even in closeness, there is distance. Because what you seek is not the other, but relief from yourself. Even beauty, which appears to lift us, is not innocent. It is the will disguised in aesthetic form, pulling the soul toward that which it can never hold. You marvel at a sunset, but despair when night falls. You grasp at youth, only to be betrayed by age. Art becomes a wound, dressed in silk, delicate, but no less mortal. The world seduces you with momentum. Move. It whispers. Achieve. Become. But in becoming, you abandon being. In motion, you forget presence. You become a function, not a being. A role, not a witness. The more you accelerate, the more hollow the scenery becomes. Until one day, you look back and see that nothing was lived, only pursued. Those who praise the hustle do not see its cost. They speak of goals, yet ignore the graveyard of burned souls beneath them. They offer success, but demand your peace in return. The hustle is not noble. It is an escape from the stillness that reveals the lie. It is not progress, but evasion. It consumes time, devours meaning, and leaves you with nothing but the memory of strain. To renounce is not to flee. It is to cease participating in delusion. To sit unmoved while the carnival passes. To feel the chaos and not be disturbed. This is not passivity, but depth. A depth inaccessible to those who cannot endure silence. To renounce is to stare into the void without blinking, and to remain. You realize now that suffering is not the problem, it is the messenger. It tells you the world cannot satisfy, that no career, no relationship, no achievement will still the will. That peace is not in the next thing, but in the cessation of seeking. This is not the death of joy, but the birth of tranquility. In this recognition, a quiet joy emerges. Not loud, not dazzling, but enduring. Like a mountain untouched by the wind. You no longer need to win. You no longer need to be seen. You no longer need to matter. And this, paradoxically, is where you begin to live. For the first time, you taste the simplicity of being. The sky needs no audience. The stone, no validation. The bird, no ambition. And you, when freed from the compulsion to become, begin to resemble them. Not higher, not greater, just present. You carry your suffering like a lantern now, not to banish the dark, but to see it clearly. Not to escape, but to witness. The world remains broken. People remain asleep. But you are no longer among them. You walk slower, speak less, observe more. You withdraw not in bitterness, but in reverence for what cannot be said. And here, in the dim glow of awareness, you feel something vast. Not happiness, not meaning, but a stillness beyond both. A silent accord with the real. Not because it is good, but because it is true. The soul, having wandered through illusion, finds rest not in paradise, but in the absence of striving. A peace not promised, but found. A peace that asks nothing and gives nothing except the end of wanting. You begin to sense how deeply the world fears stillness. It brands it laziness, madness, antisocial retreat. Yet the fear is not of inactivity, it is of exposure. For in stillness, the masks fall, the mind begins to see. And what it sees, it cannot unsee. That life, beneath the noise, is unbearably fragile. That joy, at its core, is tension briefly forgotten. That the self is not a center, but a swirl of borrowed voices, all demanding, none satisfied. The rituals of distraction are everywhere. Screens that flicker to keep the silence at bay. Conversations that skate the surface of existence. Calendars bloated with purpose, as if busyness could shield one from the inevitability of decay. But in the end, even the most curated life bends beneath entropy. The flesh fails, the mind stutters, and the will, though it fights, begins to dim. You watch others cling harder, build faster, love louder, as if intensity could outpace impermanence. But nothing escapes the slow erosion. Friendships fade, memory distort, even identities unravel. The one who once burned with passion now struggles to rise from bed. The one who once vowed eternal love now speaks in silence. The future dissolves into repetition, and the only true teacher left is sorrow. Yet sorrow, once embraced, loses its sting. It becomes a companion, not gentle, but honest. It asks nothing. It offers no solutions. It simply remains a witness to the futility of striving. And in its gaze, something tender awakens. A softness not born of weakness, but of exhaustion. A surrender not to despair, but to truth. This is the strange gift of renunciation. It does not remove pain, it removes illusion. The illusion that life owes you comfort, that happiness is your birthright, that meaning is something to find rather than dissolve into. Renunciation does not take it releases. You put down what you were never meant to carry. And when the hands are empty, the soul becomes vast. You begin to see suffering not as something to overcome, but as something to understand. Every ache, every loss, every betrayal has pointed to the same revelation, that you are not in control. That control itself is the final illusion. The world spins, with or without your consent. The sun rises on graves. The ocean swallows innocence. And yet, the breath continues. There is no justice here, no cosmic balance sheet to reconcile good and evil. There is only what is, and what is enough once you stop demanding it, becomes something else. In that moment, the metaphysical weight lifts. You are no longer trying to win. You are no longer trying to be seen. You simply are. In detachment, love returns not as desire, but as attention. You begin to see others not as means, not as threats, not as proofs of your worth, but as echoes of your own condition. Their suffering, though differently clothed, is your own. And so compassion blooms not from virtue, but from recognition. The kind of compassion that expects nothing, that does not fix, that simply stays. This is the soil where meaning quietly grows, not the grandiose meaning of destiny, but the humble meaning of presence. A sip of water, a slow breath, a shared silence. These moments, stripped of ambition, shine with a clarity no achievement can match. They are not milestones, they are eternity, condensed into now. As you walk further from the world's theater, its voices grow fainter. The advertisements, the declarations, the arguments, they lose their grip. You stop needing to be right. You stop needing to be admired. Even your name begins to feel like an echo, a costume worn by the body. You are no longer someone. You are awareness, witness, still point. The will, once frantic, becomes a whisper. Its demands slow, its voice hoarse from years of command. And in its silence, you find a deeper rhythm, one not driven by gain, but by being. The world still aches, the body still breaks, but now there is space around the pain, a quiet acceptance that holds it without needing to change it. And slowly, the soul settles not into bliss, but into truth. The truth that nothing was ever missing, that the hunger was never for things, but for stillness, that the self, so long defended, was never the point, and that in letting go, you do not vanish, you become the silence beneath all things. There is a silence that follows disillusionment, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of having finally seen. It is not peace in the way the world sells it, not comfort, not safety. It is the stillness that comes when there is nothing left to pursue, nothing left to defend. The will, like a storm exhausted, recedes, and what remains is not despair, but clarity. This clarity is not a light that warms, it is a cold light, like that of stars, distant, indifferent, and eternal. Under this light, all things are revealed for what they are. Pleasures are seen as reprieves, not answers. Achievements as distractions, not fulfillments. Even virtue begins to lose its shine, exposed as another form of ego dressed in moral robes. The will, always cunning, finds ways to disguise itself even in self-sacrifice, even in goodness. But under this light, all masks melt. What is left when even virtue is unmasked? Only being. A being no longer tethered to the dream of becoming. You sit in a room that once felt too quiet, and now it feels vast. The ticking of a clock, the rustle of leaves outside, the ache in your back, these become your companions. They ask nothing, they mean nothing, they are simply what is. And for the first time, that is enough. You look at your past not as a sequence of triumphs and failures, but as a river of unnecessary suffering. So much pain born from resistance, so many wounds inflicted by your own hand in pursuit of what could never last. You grieve not only for what happened, but for how long you believed it mattered. That belief, the belief that something out there would one day make it all worthwhile, that was the deepest illusion of all. To suffer without understanding is torment, but to suffer and see that is something else entirely. It is not joy, it is not redemption, but it is honest. It is the pain that does not lie. And in that honesty, there is a strange kind of relief. You no longer need to pretend, you no longer need to explain. The suffering becomes your teacher, your path, your home. You begin to see others not as threats or allies, not as obstacles or solutions, but as fellow exiles. You see the same hunger behind their eyes, the same fear, the same exhaustion. They run as you once did. They build as you once did. They hope as you once did. And you do not pity them, you understand them. And in that understanding, you love them, not with sentiment, but with recognition. A love without need, without expectation, without clinging. Even time begins to change. It no longer presses, it no longer hurries. Each moment, stripped of agenda, becomes deep. You walk slower, you speak less, you listen more. The world does not become better, it becomes real. And in its reality, you find something stronger than happiness. You find presence. Detachment is not an escape from the world. It is the end of illusion about the world. You still feel, you still care, but you are no longer swept away. You see the waves, but you no longer drown. This is not because you have become powerful, but because you have stopped resisting the ocean. You are not above the world. You are simply no longer at war with it. And so, you return quietly to the life you left behind. But everything has changed. Not the outer forms, but the inner weight. You work, but you are not consumed. You speak, but you no longer need to be heard. You feel, but you no longer grasp. You have become empty, and in that emptiness, there is room for everything. The anti-hustle life is not idleness. It is a refusal to believe that your worth is measured by your productivity. It is not detachment from people, but from the compulsion to use them as mirrors. It is not the end of engagement, but the end of illusion. You still move, but no longer chase. You still act, but no longer strive. You still live, but no longer demand that life give you more than what it already is. And in that quiet surrender, something vast opens. Not a door, not a heaven, but a stillness that has always been there, waiting for you to stop running, waiting for you to stop needing, waiting for you to finally see. There comes a point where even the last desire fades, not through force, not through despair, but through understanding. The will, having fed on countless illusions, finds no more nourishment. The hunger persists, but no longer commands. It weakens, like fire without air. And what remains is not ash, but space. This space is not empty, it is full in its silence. Not with promises, but with presence. Not with goals, but with truth. You no longer reach for the next thing, because there is no next thing. Time still moves, but you do not follow it. You watch it pass like wind through bare branches. It no longer takes you anywhere. And in that stillness, you begin to disappear. Not vanish, not but dissolve. The identity once guarded with such fear, begins to drift away like mist. The I you once fought to preserve reveals itself as a story told too many times. Without that story, there is no lack, no conflict. There is just a quiet rhythm of being unmoved by praise or blame, untouched by gain or loss. This disappearance is not loss, it is liberation. You no longer need to be someone, you no longer need to be remembered, you no longer need to be understood. The self, once heavy, becomes transparent. Life moves through you, not around you. Suffering comes and goes, but it no longer wounds in the same way, because there is no one left to wound. You walk through the same streets, but now they hold no urgency. You see people chasing, struggling, laughing, weeping, and you feel only tenderness. Not superiority, not sorrow, just the quiet knowing that they too are dancing with the will, as you once did. And perhaps they must, perhaps they cannot yet see, but you have seen. And in that seeing, there is nothing to fix. Even the question of meaning dissolves. It is no longer needed. The tree does not ask why it grows. The wave does not ask why it crashes. They simply are. And now, so are you. Not because you have found the answer, but because you have stopped asking the question. The ache to be fulfilled has become a soft hum in the distance. It is no longer your master. It is no longer you. You sit in the stillness like an old friend. There is no revelation, no transformation, just presence. The sky darkens, the body softens, the mind drifts. The world continues its relentless spinning, but you remain. Not indifferent, not detached, just still. The flame burns low, steady, without flicker. The breath becomes the only rhythm, the only sound. You are not waiting, you are not leaving. You are simply here. And in this final, quiet hour, nothing changes and yet everything ends. Not with a climax, but with the vanishing of need.